They laughed when she stepped up, until her 4,000 menors shot made the general go silent. The desert sun burned white over the training range, making the air ripple like heat rising off molten glass. Rows of targets shimmered in the distance, metallic dots set against a sea of sand stretching for miles. It was qualification day, the kind that separated the good from the legends. And by the sound of it, there were already plenty of self-proclaimed legends on the line. 3 clicks and counting, gentlemen. Let's see if any of you can hit something smaller than a barn today. Laughter followed the sergeant's voice. Brass shells gleamed at his boots. Recruits in dust-stained fatigues checked their scopes, adjusted bipods, and swapped jabs that sounded more like a comedy show than a live-fire exercise. And then someone noticed her. Standing at the far end of the range, half in shadow, was a woman, short, quiet, expression unreadable behind a smudge of dust across her cheek. Her uniform wasn't new. The color had faded from years of washing. The others wore sleek modern rifles with spotless optics. Hers looked like it had crawled through every war since Afghanistan. "Hey, miss," one corporal called, squinting. "You sure you're in the right place?" "Medical's 2 tenths over." A few chuckles. Someone else muttered, "Probably a clerk looking for her clipboard." She didn't answer, just slung the heavy Barrett 50 across her shoulder and walked toward the firing point. The weapon looked comically oversized in her grip until she set it down. Her movements were deliberate, almost rehearsed. She checked the bipod, adjusted her cheek rest, lifted the bolt and inspected the chamber. No hesitation. No fumbling. That was when a few of the veterans stopped laughing. From the observation tower, Brigadier General Hawthorne watched with mild curiosity. He'd seen plenty of soldiers crumble under pressure, young men shaking behind scopes, sweating through their gloves. But something about this one caught his eye. She wasn't looking at the target. She was watching the wind. Every few seconds, she'd glance at the distant flags, then the heat distortion above the dunes, tracing invisible currents in the air like she could see something the rest of them couldn't. "Who's she?" the general asked his aide. The young officer flipped through a clipboard, frowning. Name's Rivers, Logistics Corps, transferred from Forward Ops last quarter. No sniper classification on file. Then why the hell is she holding a Barrett? The aide hesitated. She requested to qualify, sir. Said she wanted to stretch her range. The CO let her join the line for morale. The general chuckled. "Morale, huh? This should be entertaining." Down below, the jokes got louder. "Careful, sweetheart, that thing kicks harder than your coffee machine. You sure you even loaded it right?" She ignored them. Slowly, she knelt behind the rifle, the desert wind tugging loose strands of hair from her bun. She pressed her cheek against the worn stock, finger resting near the trigger but not yet on it. Her breathing slowed. Inhale, exhale, stillness. Then she spoke, softly, almost to herself. "Wind's perfect today." A few soldiers snickered. "What's she talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted the elevation turret, made a final correction for Coriolis drift, the Earth's rotation itself, and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared. The recoil rocked her shoulder, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. 5 long seconds passed. Then, clang! The target 4,000 meters away rang out like a bell struck by a hammer. The laughter stopped. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Every head turned toward the impact monitor. And there it was, a clean center hit. In the tower, the general slowly lowered his binoculars. His mouth, usually ready with a sardonic quip, hung slightly open. "Well," he muttered, "I'll be damned." No one on the line spoke. The woman, Rivers, calmly pulled the bolt back, ejected the casing, and caught it mid-air before it hit the ground. Then she looked toward the tower, just for a heartbeat, and smiled. For a full 10 seconds. No one moved. The echo of her shot still hung in the desert air, faint and ghostly, like the sound refused to leave. Then the whispers started. "No way." "That's 4,000 meters, right?" She couldn't have, but the evidence glared from the digital screen at the range tower. A perfect impact dead center. The general's aide scrambled to recalibrate the monitor, mumbling something about equipment error. But even he knew. Machines didn't lie that cleanly. Down on the sand, Rivers remained still. Her expression hadn't changed. She just reloaded, slow, unhurried, and took aim again. "Ma'am?" The range officer started nervously. Protocol allows only one experimental shot. She cut him off without looking up. The first was for wind. This one's for confirmation. He froze. The tone wasn't disrespectful. It was absolute. Like someone used to giving orders, not taking them. From the tower, General Hawthorne leaned forward, his curiosity sharpening. "Let her fire," he said. The aide turned, alarmed. "Sir, if she's unqualified..." "Then I want to see what an unqualified shooter can do with a Barrett at 4 clicks, Hawthorne interrupted. "Go on, let her shoot." The base intercom crackled. "Shooter, range is clear. Fire when ready." Rivers inhaled. Somewhere deep in the dunes, a faint dust devil twisted across the horizon, a swirl of shifting sand. She adjusted her scope again, a subtle click at a time, her mind tracing air currents invisible to anyone else. She whispered under her breath, 6 knots crosswind, quarter left drift, half MOA compensation. Her finger brushed the trigger, another thunderclap rolled through the air, the casing bounced, spinning once before landing in the dirt beside her knee. 5 seconds, 6, then another clang. The second hit landed within 2 inches of the first. Someone gasped. A corporal dropped his clipboard. One soldier actually laughed, not mockingly this time, but in disbelief. Holy hell. She did it again. The general's face was unreadable, but his hands gripped the binoculars tighter. "You don't just guess a shot like that," he said quietly. "That's training. That's years of field calibration." His aide hesitated, voice trembling. "Sir, her personnel record lists no sniper qualification. She's logistics. No logistics officer shoots like that." Hawthorne muttered. He turned back toward the window, eyes narrowing on her silhouette in the sun, find out where she came from. Meanwhile, Rivers calmly unloaded the rifle. She placed the Barrett down with reverence, not pride, not arrogance, and began wiping down the barrel with a rag she carried tucked into her belt. The others kept their distance now. The same men who'd laughed minutes ago watched her with quiet awe. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" one finally asked. She smiled faintly. "Different desert. Same wind." Then she stood, slung the rifle over her shoulder, and began walking off the range as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Up in the tower, Hawthorne's aide returned out of breath, holding a tablet. "Sir?" I pulled her original transfer file from archives. "There's something off," the general frowned. "Off how?" The aide swallowed. "Her last deployment. It's redacted under Section 9 clearance. But the old unit designation still shows." He turned the tablet around. The name flashed on the screen. Ghost Glass. Hawthorne froze. That unit had been wiped from existence after the siege of Al-Hadra, an operation buried under so many classified layers even most generals couldn't access it. Only one surviving member had ever been confirmed, and she was listed as KIA. "Sir," the aide whispered, "if this file's correct, then Rivers shouldn't be alive." The general's voice was low, almost reverent. "No, she shouldn't. General Hawthorne didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his office, the only light coming from the blue glow of his monitor as he scrolled through redacted files, line after line of blacked-out text and encrypted fragments. The deeper he went, the stranger it got. Every record on Ghost Glass, the once elite recon sniper unit, had been scrubbed. Officially, the unit had ceased operations after catastrophic field loss. Unofficially, they had vanished. No remains, no gear, no debriefs. But there was one detail that refused to be erased, a call sign. Reaper 0. Confirmed neutralizations, 214. It had appeared in 6 different reports before the blackout. A sniper so precise, enemy spotters used her name to warn each other. A ghost who fired once per engagement, never missed, and never radioed twice from the same location. Reaper 0 had been a myth, a battlefield phantom soldiers spoke of in mess halls. The kind of legend whispered with reverence. Now, she was standing on Hawthorne's firing range, disguised as a logistics officer named Rivers. The general leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. If she's really Reaper 0, why the cover? Why now? His aide, Lieutenant Barris, was standing nervously by the door. "Sir, should we bring her in for questioning?" Hawthorne looked up sharply. "You don't question someone like that, Barris. You watch them, and you figure out what they're waiting for." He exhaled slowly, "because ghosts don't come back without a reason." The next morning, Rivers reported as usual, quiet, composed, like yesterday never happened. Her uniform bore no special markings, her tone no pride, but the base wasn't the same. Every corridor she walked down went silent. Soldiers who had mocked her the day before now moved aside. Even seasoned marksmen nodded with a mix of fear and respect. At breakfast, a corporal dared to ask, "Hey, ma'am, you really make that 4,000-meter shot yesterday?" She looked up from her tray, calm as ever. It wasn't the distance that mattered. Then what was it? The wind stopped for a second. No one knew what to say to that. Later that afternoon, Hawthorne requested a private meeting under pretext of a range debrief. She entered his office with crisp posture, eyes alert. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "At ease, Sergeant," Hawthorne said, gesturing for her to sit. "You've got a hell of a steady hand." "Where'd you learn that?" "Years of trial and error," she replied. "That right?" The general's voice hardened. "Because I pulled your file, and it says you were KIA in Al-Hadra." For the first time, Rivers' mask cracked, just barely. Her jaw tensed. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "You shouldn't be here," Hawthorne countered. "But you are." They locked eyes. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint hum of the overhead light. Finally, she spoke. "Al-Hadra wasn't a battle, sir. It was a burial. Ghostglass wasn't wiped out, and we were erased. By who? By our own command." The words hit the room like another sniper shot. Hawthorne leaned forward slowly. "You're saying—" "I'm saying the mission was never supposed to succeed. We were bait." Outside, the wind began to rise, rattling the blinds like distant gunfire. Rivers stood, adjusting her sleeves. "You can tell your superiors whatever you want, sir. But I came back for one thing." "And what's that?" She looked at him, eyes cold and steady. "To finish what they started." Then she turned and walked out, leaving the general staring after her, realizing for the first time that whatever was coming next wasn't a coincidence. That night, a sandstorm swept across the base, harsh, howling winds that buried footprints and erased trails. Most soldiers huddled inside their bunks, pretending to sleep. But in the command tower, alarms flickered, unidentified radio traffic, encrypted origin, hostile territory. The signal repeated every few minutes, a short burst, 3 tones, and one word in between static. Ghostglass. General Hawthorne stood beside the comms officer, eyes locked on the screen. "Where's it coming from?" "No clear fix, sir. The storm's messing with triangulation, but..." The young operator hesitated. "It's our encryption key." Hawthorne's heart sank. That shouldn't be possible. No one outside their base had access to that frequency. Not unless they'd been here before. He didn't hesitate. "Get me Rivers. Now." Minutes later, she arrived, hood up, eyes half-shadowed under the dim red lights of the tower. She didn't need an explanation. She'd heard it too. "Play it again," she said. The operator obeyed. The static flared, then that same burst. 3 tones, one word. Her lips tightened. "It's not a signal," she murmured. "It's a distress code, a call for extraction." "From who?" Hawthorne asked. "Someone who was supposed to be dead." Her fingers traced the rhythm in the air, then she turned sharply to the general. "Get your pilots ready. We're leaving in 10. "Leaving?" "We don't even know who—" "Yes, we do." Her voice was low but steady. "That's my old team." They took off under the cover of the storm, 2 helicopters slicing through clouds of grit and lightning. Hawthorne sat opposite her in the cabin, his headset crackling with mission noise. "You sure about this, Rivers?" She didn't look at him. "You wanted to know who I was. This is it." When the chopper broke through the storm wall, the ground below lit up with tracer fire, enemy patrols, heavy machine guns, and, in the middle of it all, a fading infrared strobe pulsing weakly through the smoke. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "There. That's suicide," Hawthorne barked. "Not if I'm the one flying." Before he could stop her, she unhooked her harness, dropped from the open side door, and vanished into the dark. She landed hard, rolling through sand and shrapnel, rifle already drawn. The air reeked of burned oil and cordite. Ahead, a half-destroyed bunker blinked with a dying red flare, the Ghostglass mark. Inside, 3 figures lay half-buried, unconscious but breathing. Her hand trembled as she brushed the dust from one of their dog tags. "Spectre?" The man groaned weakly. "0? You came back?" "I never stopped," she whispered, pulling a stim from her belt and pressing it to his neck. Bullets tore through the wall, showering sparks across their faces. She turned toward the sound, calm and precise. One breath, one shot. Silence. Outside, the A-10's roar thundered overhead. Hawthorne had called in air support. By dawn, the survivors were loaded into the evac chopper. The medics worked frantically. But Hawthorne noticed Rivers hadn't moved. She sat near the ramp, covered in ash, watching the sunrise. "You found them," he said softly. "Not all of them," she replied, "but enough." He nodded slowly. "You're not a ghost anymore, Sergeant." She looked at him then, eyes calm, distant, but alive. "Ghosts don't die, sir. They just wait to be seen." The engines roared, and the chopper lifted off, 3 shadows lighter than it had landed. But for Hawthorne, the war had just changed, because now he knew. The legends weren't gone. They were waking up. The briefing room was silent. Every soldier inside knew the weight of what they were about to do, even if the details were sealed under layers of classified clearance. General Hawthorne stood at the head of the table, staring at the projection map. It was a maze of coordinates, red zones, and heat signatures, all centered on a single compound buried deep in enemy territory. "This is iron dust," he said grimly. The last confirmed base of the cell that took down Ghost Glass. The air grew heavier. At the far end of the room sat Rivers, no longer in her logistics uniform. Her hair was pulled back tight, her rifle case at her feet, and a faint black insignia stitched on her sleeve. Ghost Glass, reforged. When Hawthorne finished, she stood. "They think we're coming with planes and armor," she said, voice steady. "We're not. Then how are we getting in?" a ranger asked. "The same way they erased us," she replied. Quiet. A murmur spread through the room. This wasn't an official op. This was personal. At 0200 hours, the team deployed. No insignia, no transponders, no call signs. Just black gear and the weight of unfinished business. They moved through the valley in silence, moonlight cutting through the dust like silver knives. Every step closer to the target felt heavier. Not from fear, but from memory. Rivers led the formation, scanning ridges through her thermal scope. Her heart pounded, but her hands didn't shake. Not this time. Behind her, Spectre, barely recovered but stubborn as ever, covered their flank. "Feels like old times," he muttered. "Let's hope it doesn't end the same way," she whispered back. By the time they reached the compound, the wind had shifted, a storm building on the horizon. The perfect cover. Rivers raised her hand. The team froze. Through her scope, she spotted 2 enemy snipers on the rooftop, relaxed, unaware. She adjusted for wind, distance, and drift. 2 shots. 1 breath. The crack echoed through the valley. 2 silhouettes dropped. "Roof's clear," Spectre said. They breached. Explosions erupted as the team swept through corridors. Flashes of light. Bursts of gunfire. The clang of boots on metal. Every corner, every turn. Every pull of the trigger brought Rivers closer to the heart of it all. The command room. She kicked the door open. Inside, a single man sat at a terminal, typing rapidly. His uniform bore no insignia, but the voice that spoke when he turned chilled her to the bone. "You should have stayed dead." Reaper. It was Colonel Hensley, the man who had commanded Ghost Glass into their fatal mission, then reported them KIA. "You buried us," she said coldly. "You were never meant to live. Ghost Glass was an experiment. Precision without conscience. You turned us into targets. I turned you into history." Her rifle came up, but she didn't fire. Instead, she tapped her comm. "Hawthorne." "Target confirmed." Seconds later, the entire compound shook. Outside, the A-10's scream tore through the storm, a perfect, deafening roar of judgment. The blast engulfed the base in fire. When the dust cleared, Rivers stood among the wreckage, the wind tugging at her torn uniform. Hours later, at the evac point, Hawthorne approached her. "It's done." She nodded faintly, eyes distant. "Not done, just balanced." He studied her a moment longer. "You know the brass won't acknowledge any of this." "They don't have to," she said quietly. "Ghost Glass never needed medals." And as the first light of dawn spilled across the valley, the storm finally broke, not in thunder, but in silence, because the ghosts had spoken, and the world had listened. Weeks passed. The official report of Operation Iron Dust was brief. 5 lines buried deep in the classified archives. Labeled as routine tactical sweep. No names, no commendations, no trace of the people who'd made it happen, but stories have a way of slipping through walls. By the time the next wave of recruits arrived at the desert training range, whispers had already begun. They spoke of a mission that never existed, of a woman who'd walked alone into enemy territory and burned a fortress to ash, of a unit that had vanished years ago, but somehow returned when no one else would. General Hawthorne watched them from a distance, the same way he had once watched Rivers step up to that firing line. Now the range was marked by a single plaque, a small, weathered piece of steel mounted on a post at the edge of the sand. No inscription, just an emblem burned into it, the faint outline of a shattered visor, the mark of ghost glass. A young sniper trainee approached him one afternoon. "Sir, is it true?" she asked. "About Reaper Zero?" Hawthorne didn't answer right away. He looked out over the range, wind stirring the dust where she had once stood. "Depends what you mean by true," he said quietly. "They say she made a 4,000-meter shot," the recruit said, eyes wide, with a cracked rifle. He allowed himself a faint smile. "That part's true." "And that she disappeared afterward?" He nodded. "That part's true too. So where is she now?" The general paused, then looked up at the empty sky, where an A-10 rumbled faintly in the far distance, cutting through the clouds like a ghost's shadow. "Right where she belongs," he said, watching. A year later, the ghost glass insignia quietly resurfaced in the field, painted on the side of a downed enemy convoy, carved into the casing of a spent bullet, etched into a wall near a captured facility. No explanation, no survivors. But every time the emblem appeared, the same report followed: sniper unknown. Single shot. "No miss." Hawthorne kept one photograph on his desk. It was old, edges burned, colors faded, showing 6 figures in desert gear, smiling in front of a broken jeep. On the back, written in fading ink, were 3 words: "We never missed." He'd look at it before every deployment briefing, before every new batch of soldiers arrived, a quiet reminder that legends aren't born in glory. They're forged in loss, silence, and impossible choices. One evening, as the sun sank over the dunes, a convoy of young officers stopped at the range memorial. They stood before the steel plaque, heads bowed, unsure why it mattered, only that it did. And as the wind shifted, one of them thought she heard a faint crack echo through the canyon. A single, distant shot, no target. No reason, just a whisper in the wind. Hawthorne looked up from his office window miles away, smiling to himself. "Still keeping score, aren't you, Reaper?" He turned off the lights, the base quiet beneath a blood-red sky. Somewhere out there, in the endless stretch of desert and memory, a ghost still walked, unseen, uncelebrated, undefeated. In the official record, Reaper Zero never existed, but in the silence between gunfire, in the awe of every sniper who steadies their breath and trusts the impossible, her story lives on, because the world forgot her name. But the battlefield never did.